I sit here in my study, surrounded by the artifacts that have defined my life's work, and I find myself drawn again to that small mahogany music box, resting on the shelf behind me, its presence as unsettling now as it was 23 years ago when the Hendricks family first brought it to our attention. Mrs. Hendricks had found the piece at an estate sale in Salem, Massachusetts, drawn to its intricate craftsmanship and the delicate ballerina that pirouetted to what she described as the most hauntingly beautiful melody she'd ever heard. The seller, an elderly woman with trembling hands and eyes that refused to meet Mrs. Hendricks' gaze directly, had seemed almost desperate to be rid of the piece, accepting the first offer without negotiation, and muttering something about it being time for someone else to care for her now. For 3 weeks, the family enjoyed their acquisition, winding it each evening after dinner, watching 7-year-old Sarah dance along with the tiny figure, her laughter filling their modest colonial home with joy that would soon turn to something far more sinister. The music box itself was a masterwork of 19th-century craftsmanship, its mahogany surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl roses and tiny silver stars, while the ballerina inside was carved from ivory, with such exquisite detail that individual features were visible on her porcelain painted face, features that we would later discover bore an unsettling resemblance to historical photographs of a young French dancer named Marguerite Dubois. It began with sleep disturbances, as these cases often do. Sarah would wake in the middle of the night, claiming she could hear the music box playing from downstairs, though her parents assured her it was merely her imagination, that the mechanism had been wound down hours before bedtime. But when Mr. Hendricks descended one particular evening to investigate his daughter's persistent claims, he found the music box open, its ballerina spinning slowly in the darkness, the melody drifting through the house with an otherworldly quality that made his skin crawl and his breath catch in his throat. The tune itself was unlike anything he'd heard before, not quite a waltz, not quite a lullaby, but something that seemed to carry within its notes both incredible beauty and profound sorrow, as if the melody itself were mourning some great loss. The family began documenting the incidents, noting that the music would play at precisely 3:17 a.m. each night, always the same duration of exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, always stopping abruptly, as if someone had slammed the lid shut, and always leaving behind a lingering scent of roses mixed with something else. Something sweet and cloying that reminded Mrs. Hendricks of flowers left too long in a vase. The smell of beauty beginning its inevitable decay. As days passed, Sarah's behavior grew increasingly disturbing. She would speak in whispers to empty corners of her room, giggle at jokes no one else could hear, and most unnervingly, she began incorporating phrases into her speech that seemed far beyond her years, speaking of loss and longing, and the weight of unfinished business in a voice that carried an adult's melancholy. The child started sleepwalking, always gravitating toward the music box, standing before it for hours in a trance. Like state, sometimes humming along with melodies that weren't playing, her small hands positioned as if she were dancing with an invisible partner, her feet moving through positions that no 7-year-old should have known without years of training. Mrs. Hendricks contacted local authorities when she found Sarah one morning in the living room, completely unresponsive, standing perfectly still before the closed music box, with tears streaming down her face, speaking in what sounded like another language, though later research would reveal it as 19th-century French, specifically phrases used in ballet instruction and theatrical performance. Words like plus crucius and danse pour moi, that seemed to flow from her lips as if she'd spoken them her entire life. The local police dismissed the family's concerns as stress-related imagination, and their pediatrician could find nothing physically wrong with Sarah, though he noted that her muscle tone and posture had improved dramatically, as if she'd been enrolled in intensive dance training. When we arrived at the Hendricks home, the oppressive atmosphere was immediately apparent. The house felt heavy, as if the air itself had taken on weight, and there was an underlying current of sadness that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a palpable sense that something unresolved lingered in every shadow and corner. During our initial investigation, we learned that the music box had belonged to a young dancer named Marguerite Dubois, who had performed with traveling theater companies throughout New England in the 1890s before her career was cut short by a tragic accident during a performance in Boston, where she fell from the stage during her final act, breaking her neck and dying instantly before an audience of horrified spectators who had gathered to witness what was meant to be her greatest triumph. The music box had been a gift from her lover, a musician named Henri Rousseau, who had composed the melodies specifically for her. And according to historical records we uncovered in the archives of the Boston Public Library, Marguerite had been practicing her final routine when the accident occurred. The same dance she performed every night in her dressing room to the accompaniment of that haunting melody, preparing for what she believed would be her breakthrough performance before Boston's high society. What made the case particularly complex was the gradual revelation that Marguerite's spirit wasn't malevolent in the traditional sense. She was simply unable to accept that her final performance had ended so abruptly. So she continued to dance, using whatever vessel she could find to complete the routine that death had stolen from her. And in Sarah, she had found someone young enough and pure enough to serve as her earthly instrument. As our investigation progressed, we observed Sarah's transformation accelerating. Her natural 7-year-old gait became increasingly graceful and measured, her posture straightening into the rigid discipline of classical ballet. And most disturbing of all, she began exhibiting knowledge of dance techniques and French phrases that she couldn't possibly have learned elsewhere. Moving through complex ballet positions with a precision that spoke of years of training she'd never received. The family's attempts to remove the music box from their home had failed, not because they couldn't physically move it, but because each time they tried, Sarah would become violently ill, developing mysterious fevers that doctors couldn't explain, crying inconsolably until the box was returned to its place in their living room, where it seemed to pulse with an energy that we could measure on our electromagnetic field detectors. During our third night of investigation, we witnessed the full manifestation of Marguerite's presence, when Sarah, still apparently asleep, began performing an elaborate ballet routine in the living room at exactly 3:17 a.m., while the music box played its melody, her movements displaying a technical proficiency that should have been impossible for someone her age, her face bearing an expression of desperate concentration, as if she were performing for the most important audience of her life. Every gesture infused with a passion and longing that belonged to someone much older and far more experienced in life's disappointments. The temperature in the room dropped dramatically during these episodes, our breath visible in the suddenly frigid air, and our electromagnetic field detectors registered significant anomalies, while our audio equipment captured not only the music box's melody, but also the faint sound of applause and encouraging voices calling out in French, as if an entire theater full of spectators were watching and appreciating this nightly performance from beyond the veil of death itself. What made this case particularly heartbreaking was the realization that Marguerite wasn't trying to harm Sarah. She was simply completing her art, using the child as a vessel to achieve the ending that had been denied to her over a century ago, and each night's performance brought her closer to the resolution she desperately needed, the final bow that would allow her to rest. The breakthrough came when we arranged for a professional ballerina from the Boston Ballet Company to visit the home and observe one of Sarah's nocturnal performances. After which she confirmed that the routine was indeed a complete classical ballet, technically complex and emotionally profound, telling the story of a young woman's journey from hope to despair, and finally to acceptance of her fate. Working with the dancer, we were able to identify the specific ballet Marguerite had been performing on the night of her death, a piece called The Swan's Last Flight, which told the story of a dying swan's final dance. And we realized that Marguerite needed someone to witness and acknowledge the completion of this performance, in order to find peace on our final night with the family. We gathered in the living room with the professional ballerina, several witnesses, and most importantly, Sarah herself, who was awake and aware but seemed to understand intuitively that something significant was about to happen. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the music box began to play, and Sarah rose from her chair, her movements flowing seamlessly into the now familiar routine. But this time, there was a different quality to her performance, a sense of completion and farewell that was visible in every gesture, every leap, every graceful turn of her small body. As the performance reached its climax, the room filled with an overwhelming sense of presence, and several witnesses later reported seeing a translucent figure dancing alongside Sarah, a woman in an elaborate 19th century costume, whose face radiated both immense sadness and profound gratitude. When the music finally ended, Sarah took a deep bow, and for a moment the room was filled with the sound of thunderous applause that seemed to come from everywhere, nowhere at once, followed by a whispered "Mercy, mon enfant that brought tears to every adult eye present. The music box never played again after that night, and Sarah returned to her normal childhood patterns within a few days, with no memory of her nocturnal performances, and no residual effects from her experience as Marguerite's vessel. Even now, decades later, as I sit here looking at that mahogany music box with its silent ballerina frozen in mid-pirouette, I am reminded that not all supernatural encounters are battles between good and evil. Sometimes they're simply conversations between the living and the dead, opportunities to help souls find the peace they've been seeking for longer than any of us can truly comprehend. And I know that somewhere beyond the veil, a young dancer named Marguerite Dubois is finally at rest, having completed her performance at last.